You are nothing but a leech living off my husband. My daughter-in-law said those words to me standing in the kitchen of the house I had been quietly paying for over 15 years. I did not look at her. I looked at my son. And my son looked at the floor. Then he said in a voice I did not recognize, "Dad, Sophie and her family come first now. If you cannot accept that, you should probably find somewhere else to go." I nodded once. All right. Then I walked upstairs, picked up the small canvas bag I had quietly packed 3 days earlier, and walked out that front door. They thought they had finally chased off an old man who did not know his place. I let them believe it. Exactly 22 days later, when the four of them came back from their long weekend at the coast, what was waiting for them was not the house they knew. It was a new lock, a new family living inside, and a county deputy standing on the porch holding a clipboard. My name is Daniel Whitaker. I am 68 years old, and I have lived my whole life in a small town called Miller's Bend in the northern end of Vermont. I was a cabinet maker for 41 years. Most people hear that word and think of pretty things: kitchen fronts, bookshelves, trim work. But the real work, the work I loved, was joinery, dovetails, mortise and tenon. A joint does not hold because of what you can see. The face of a drawer is the pretty part. What actually keeps that drawer square for 100 years is the dovetail cut into the sides, tucked away where nobody will ever look again. What is hidden does the work. What is seen gets the credit. Hold that thought. My wife was Grace. Everyone called her Gracie. We were married 37 years. She died 5 years ago, last April, ovarian cancer. I am not going to walk you through the middle of that. But Grace was smarter than me. She had a saying she must have said to me 1,000 times. She would say, "Danny, a house is not the roof you can see. It is the beams underneath that nobody looks at." She said it about our marriage. She said it about raising our boy. And I did not understand what she meant until I was 68 years old, sitting alone in a diner outside Burlington with a cup of black coffee going cold in my hands. That saying is going to come back. Just remember it. After Grace died, I did what a lot of men do. I made coffee for one and stared at the pot. I set the table for two, then took the second plate back before I sat down. And a year after the funeral, when I could not stand another winter alone, my son Nathan asked if I would move in with him and Sophie. Nathan is 38. He is a project manager for a construction firm in Burlington, and I have never been anything but proud of the work my son does. His wife is Sophie. She is 36. They got married 13 years ago, and a year after that they wanted a house. The math did not work. She still had loans from a program she never finished. They had wedding debt. The bank shook its head. Nathan came over on a Wednesday evening and sat at my kitchen table and could barely get the sentence out. He was 25 and embarrassed, and he kept turning his coffee mug in circles on the wood. I did not make my boy ask twice. I was still less than 2 years out from burying his mother, and I would have given him anything to have somewhere to be on a Sunday afternoon. I put down the down payment. I covered the closing costs. And when the loan officer explained that the cleanest way to structure it was to put the mortgage and the deed in my name until they got on stronger ground, everybody nodded. Sophie smiled at me across the table and said, "Just for a little while, Dan. Thank you so much." I believed her. And I think in that moment she believed herself. I set the payment to come out of my retirement account on the 5th of every month, and I did not say one word about it for the next 15 years. That is not generosity. That is the whole quiet failure of this story, and I will come back to it. I moved in with them about 11 months later because the house I had shared with Grace had gotten to where I could not walk through the front door after 4 in the afternoon without hearing her voice in the kitchen. And the first 4 years were good. Sunday dinners. Nathan and I grilled in the backyard. Sophie made pot roast in winter. The first spring, I built a set of custom bookshelves along the east wall of the living room. Solid cherry, hand-cut dovetails on every drawer. 6 weeks of evenings in the garage. It is still the finest piece I ever made. I set one small piece of tiger maple into the third shelf from the bottom on the left side, about the size of a playing card. Cabinet makers do that. You slip a mark into your work, nobody notices, and you know it is there. Sophie used to bring me lemonade out to the garage while I was cutting joints. She would sit on an overturned crate and ask me questions about how the wood knew where to bend. She was interested. That was real. Then her parents retired, Martin and Helen Boone. They started coming up on weekends, and then the weekends got longer. There is no single day when somebody moves in. There is a Tuesday, 10 months later, when you realize you have not had the house to yourself since March. Martin had an opinion about every inch of that property, and it took me nearly 4 years to understand something about Martin that changed how I looked at the whole business. Martin had never owned a house in his life, not once. Sophie told me later she moved 13 times before she finished high school, 6 school districts. And here was Martin, sitting in a 4-bedroom home on 2 acres with a stone fireplace. Every time somebody came over, he gave them the tour. This is our fireplace. This is the deck we put in. He did not do it out of spite. He did it because he was living as a guest in somebody else's house again, and narrating it as his own was the only way a man like that could keep his shoulders straight through dinner. I understood him about 4 years too late. If this story has already reached somewhere inside you, if you know somebody who has quietly carried a family for years without ever hearing thank you, please stay with me. Subscribe to this channel so more stories like this can reach the people who need them. There are quieter men out there than the world ever notices. Helen was different. Helen did not need to be rude. She simply conducted herself as though I was not in the room. If I started a sentence, she finished her own on top of it. And if I ever mentioned grace, the subject changed inside a single breath every single time. Then in the 5th year, the photographs came off the walls. I came home from a Saturday morning job. I walked into my son's living room, and the mantle looked different. You know how you can tell a room is different before you can put your finger on what has changed? That. And then I understood our wedding photograph was gone from the end of the mantle. I went through the whole house, every one of them. Our wedding day, Grace and Nathan at the county fair in 1994. The family portrait from Montpelier, where Grace made all 3 of us wear the same shade of gray. All of them gone. I found them in the hall closet, in a plastic storage tub, tucked underneath the box of Christmas decorations. I want you to sit with that. Under the Christmas decorations, which is the exact shelf in every house in this country where you put the things you take out one time a year, somebody had taken every single photograph of my dead wife off the walls of the home she never had a chance to visit and had filed her quietly under seasonal. And when I asked Sophie about it that evening, she said she was going for a cleaner look. A cleaner look? I carried one of those photographs out to my truck that night, and I cried harder than I did at her actual funeral. At the funeral, I was crying because Grace was gone. That is grief, and grief you can survive. In that driveway, I was crying because somebody had made a decision using a plastic tub that my wife's memory was clutter. Grace spent 11 months losing her own life one piece at a time, and I stood in my own driveway on a Tuesday and watched somebody finish the erasing with a lid and a label. After that, things moved faster. To the neighbors, I stopped being Danny. I became Nathan's dad. And in the 6th year, I overheard Sophie in the backyard on the phone. She said, "It is just hard. We really need more privacy in our own house." And then she said, "Sort of. It is complicated, sort of," about whether I lived there or not. I went inside that night and got out my bank statements, mortgage, property tax, insurance, all of it going out on the 5th of every month. For 12 years at that point, I almost stopped the payments that night. I had the phone in my hand, and I put the receiver back down and told myself families go through stretches. I told myself Nathan would notice eventually. My son did not change all at once. He changed the way a riverbank changes. You do not see any single spring flood go by, and then one year you notice the bank is 15 feet closer to the porch. If Sophie wanted Thanksgiving at her parents', that is where Thanksgiving happened. If Martin said something about how a man my age should think about downsizing, Nathan looked at his plate. There was never a fight. There were about 400 small silences. and every one of them was louder than a shouting match would have been. And then it ended over a workshop. I had my tools in the third bay of the garage, 41 years of them, my table saw, my chisels laid out on a leather roll, my father's block plane, which I have used since I was 17 and which has his initials carved into the beach handle. Sophie wanted to turn that bay into a home gym. I said I still use that space every week. And Martin laughed from the doorway and said something about a man in his 60s not needing all those tools anymore. And Sophie crossed her arms and said, "We need the room more than you do, Dan." And I said calmly, my voice did not go up, I said, "Sophie, I paid for that garage." And that is when it came out of her. She said, "You have been living off my husband for years. You are a leech in this house." I want to slow this down, because there were about 11 seconds after that where nobody said one word. Martin was in the doorway with a dish towel over his shoulder, looking at his shoes. Helen was at the sink, and she reached over and turned the faucet on. That is what she did. She turned the water on so she would not have to be part of what was about to happen. And Nathan was standing by the kitchen island with his phone in his hand, and I looked at my son. Here is what was going through my head. It was not anger. It was, he is going to say something now. Here it comes. 38 years of raising this boy, and here it comes. And I was not thinking about the mortgage. I was thinking about a Saturday morning in 1993 when Nathan was 6 and he fell off the swing set and split his chin open, and I carried him 3 blocks with my thumb pressed against the cut. That is what your mind hands you at a moment like that. And Nathan set his phone down on the counter and he looked at the floor and he said, "Dad, Sophie and her family come first now. That is just how it is. And if you cannot be okay with that, you should probably find somewhere else to go." Nobody moved. And here is the strange thing. I laughed. Not at him, not meanly. Just one short sound that came out of me, because what he had just said was so completely impossible that my body had a reaction before my head could catch up. Then I said, "All right, that is all." That was the whole thing. I did not tell them one single word about the deed, not a syllable. And I want to tell you why, because it is the only part of that afternoon I am proud of. If I had said it right then, "This is my house, I have made 179 payments," it would have turned into a fight about money in the next 5 seconds. And this was not about money. It has never been about money. So I went upstairs and got the canvas bag I had packed 3 days earlier, and I walked out the front door. I stood on that walkway and looked at the front of that house. And that is when I thought about the joinery. Because a good joint holds because of what nobody looks at. And I had spent 15 years being the joint. And the whole time, nobody inside that building had any idea I was in there holding the frame square. That is not their crime. That is mine. I pulled over on the edge of the county road 2 miles away and sat in the truck for maybe 20 minutes. Then I called a lawyer named Rebecca Marsh, who had settled Grace's estate. She got me into her office first thing Monday morning. She already had my file open. The warranty deed. My name, only my name, since the day of closing, never amended. The mortgage originated by me, paid every month from an account only I had ever touched. 15 years of property tax receipts. A new roof I paid $19,000 for in 2020. A furnace replacement in 2022. A septic line repair last spring that cost me almost $8,000 and that my son does not know happened. She looked at me and said, "Dan, this has always been your house. They live there because you allow it." And then she said, "What do you want to accomplish?" And I said, "I do not want to hurt anybody. I just cannot go on paying for a roof I am not welcome under." She laid out 4 options. Keep paying, ask them to leave, put them on a real lease, or sell. And I said, "I want to sell it." On the drive back to the small motel out by the interstate, I kept waiting to feel guilty. It did not come. What came was calm, not happy, not proud. Calm, the specific kind you get when you finally make a decision that is not built on being afraid. Grace used to say, "You cannot pour from an empty cup." She said it to me 40 times over 37 years, and I never once knew what she was talking about until I was 68 years old, sitting at a red light on Main Street. 3 days later, Nathan called me, cheerful. Sophie's parents had surprised them with a long weekend down at the coast, leaving Thursday morning. Martin had booked the whole thing. He did not ask where I was staying. He did not ask if I was all right. He did not say one word about what had happened in the kitchen. And some stupid part of me thought a weekend away might give my son room to actually think about it. Instead, I got to watch it on my phone every morning. Sophie by a pool, Martin at a grill, Helen under an umbrella, Nathan with his arm around his wife in front of a row of palm trees. And underneath one photograph, Sophie had written, "Finally living the way we should be." I let myself sit inside that for about 10 minutes, then put the phone face down. Self-pity is a chair that is very hard to stand up from once you sit down in it. And then I got busy. It turned out to be the best 2.5 weeks I had lived through in 6 years. Rebecca sent me to a realtor named Clara Cole, who walked the property with me on a Friday afternoon and stopped in the living room and said, "Who built these bookshelves?" And I said, "I did." And she stood there and looked at them properly for about a minute. Nobody had said one word about those bookshelves in 11 years. I put real money into getting the property ready. Cleaners for 2 days, a painter to redo the hallway. I patched every nail hole myself, and I finally rebuilt the porch railing I had been meaning to get to since last summer, working alongside a young carpenter named Marcus. Somewhere in the middle of the second afternoon, sanding a rail, I caught myself whistling. Not because I was selling, because for the first time in about 4 years, I was building something instead of just absorbing something. Before I take you through what happened next, I want to hear from you. If you are watching this from a small town or a big city, from your kitchen table or your truck or your porch, drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from right now. I read every single one. And knowing somebody out there is listening keeps these stories alive. If there is a person you know who has ever been treated like furniture in their own home, share this with them tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. Clara called me on a Tuesday sounding a little stunned. 29 showings in 3 days, 11 offers by Saturday, 4 all cash. I did not take the highest offer. I took one from a young couple with 2 small children. She was a school teacher over at the elementary. He was a paramedic on the county ambulance service. They wrote me a letter. She wrote about the bookshelves. She said her husband worked long shifts and slept during the day, and she wanted a house with real quiet places where she could read to her kids at night. I read that letter 3 times, and then I put my hand around Grace's wedding ring, which is on a chain I have worn under my shirt since the day of the funeral, and I said out loud, "Gracie, she would have liked these 2. We closed the following Thursday. The 4 of them flew home on Friday. Now here's the part everybody wants to know about, and I need to be clear about how I did it. Every single item belonging to Nathan, Sophie, Martin, or Helen was professionally packed and inventoried. I hired a moving company. 4 workers. 2 full days. Every box labeled by room and owner. The whole load taken to a climate-controlled storage facility. 90 days prepaid in Nathan's name. I did not throw away one single thing. I was not trying to disassemble their lives. I was ending my financial support of 4 grown adults. Those are not the same act. The first call came at 2:14. "Dad, there is a moving truck in the driveway." Then another, then Sophie, then Nathan again. 21 missed calls before I got to the bench by the pond behind the motel, where I sat and watched a heron working the shallows and did not answer one of them. I got the rest of it from the buyers later. The young family was about 40 minutes into carrying boxes when the SUV came up the drive. Sophie got out with her sunglasses still on and told the woman on the lawn that she had the wrong house. And the woman, who was maybe 5'3" and a school teacher, said very gently, "Ma'am, we closed on this house yesterday morning." Martin got loud about it being their property, and her husband came out of the garage and did not raise his voice at all. He simply went and got the closing folder out of the truck and held it open. Sophie went to the front door and put her key in the lock, and the key did not turn. I had the locks rekeyed Thursday afternoon. Somebody called the sheriff, and a county deputy stood in that driveway and told my son that county records showed the parcel had transferred ownership the day before. And Sophie turned to Nathan and she said, "You told me your father would never do something like this." And Nathan did not answer her, because he had believed that he would have said it under oath. The calls kept climbing. 47, 63. And after dark, Nathan left a voicemail that was not angry at all anymore. He just said, "Dad, please, I do not understand." And I sat on that bench in the dark with the phone in my hand, and I realized something that reorganized the whole thing. He genuinely did not know. He had never once looked at the deed. He had never asked whose account the mortgage came out of. When the septic line failed last spring, he came home from work that evening and it was fixed, and he never once asked what it had cost. Not because he was hiding, because it was automatic since he was 25 years old. And a thing that happens automatically for 15 years stops being a thing that happens at all. Convenience turns into invisibility every single time. I called him back around 9 o'clock. He answered on the first ring, and he was crying, which I have heard from that man maybe 3 times in his life. And I said, "Nathan, I did not take your house. I sold my house." And there was a silence on that line, I would put it 15 seconds. And I said, "It has been in my name since the day you moved into it. I have made 179 mortgage payments. I do not believe you have ever actually known that." And he said, "No, Dad, just that, no." And then he said, "Where are we supposed to go?" And I told him about the storage unit and the 90 prepaid days. And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Because I finally believed you, son. You told me your wife and her family came first now, and I heard you, and a man does not keep paying for a house he has been told he is a guest in." And then Sophie got the phone away from him. She was screaming about humiliation, about what a father owes his son. And I said, "Sophie, I owe my son love. I do not owe him a mortgage." And I hung up, and I turned the phone off, and I slept 9 hours that night, which I had not done since before Grace got sick. The month after was quiet in a way that frightened me at first. For 15 years, quiet had meant somebody was upset, and I had a job to do to fix it. This quiet just sat there. After about 3 weeks, I understood it was not loneliness. It was room. I bought a small 2-bedroom house in a little town on the northern edge of the state, painted white with green trim and a porch that catches the evening light off the Maple Hills. I paid cash, no mortgage. My new neighbor came over with a pan of blueberry muffins before I had the moving truck unloaded. Her name was Emma Bennett. Within 2 weeks, I had started volunteering with a small outfit that does repairs for older folks and ramps who cannot do their own porch steps or ramps or grab bars. One Saturday in October, we rebuilt a whole set of porch steps for an old man named Walter Hayes, 92 years old, Korean War veteran. And when we finished, he stood at the top of those steps and cried and shook my hand with both of his and thanked me the way nobody had thanked me for anything in a very long time. Gratitude is not loud. It is usually one short sentence that somebody actually means. Through my lawyer, and eventually from Nathan himself, I heard how it went for them. A 2-bedroom rental in Burlington and a life that turned out to cost about $1,200 more every month than they had ever understood, because the biggest bill in it had been coming out of an account nobody in that household had bothered to look at since 2011. Martin and Helen went back to New Hampshire inside 2 months. There was not room. For the first time in almost 12 years, nobody else was carrying that family. Nathan called me in December. He had picked up weekend shifts at a lumber yard. And I said, "Nathan, I am proud of you." And he went quiet. Then he said, "Dad, I did not expect that." And then he said, "I had no idea what any of it actually cost." And before he hung up, he said he loved me, which he had not said to me since his mother's funeral. And I sat on that porch until it got dark. That was not forgiveness. That was a beginning. And they are not the same thing. In February, my lawyer sent me a box of old files. In the bottom was a manila envelope in Grace's handwriting. Inside were canceled checks from the down payment, a copy of the first amortization schedule, and a photograph of me and Nathan out on Lake Champlain in 1997 holding up a lake trout that was not nearly as big as we were making it look. And on the outside, in her hand, Grace had written for Nathan and his house. She had started that envelope before she got sick. She thought we were building him a foundation. And I sat down on the kitchen floor with that envelope in my hands. A foundation is the thing that lets something else stand up on its own. A foundation is not something you keep holding. And I had not built my son a foundation. I had gotten underneath him when he was 25 and stayed there for 15 years. And every year he leaned a little more and I braced a little harder. And I called that being a good father. Nathan came up to see me in March. He looked different, heavier through the shoulders from the lumber yard. Lines around his eyes he had not had in the fall. We sat on the porch swing and watched the geese come in low over the maples before he said anything at all. And he said, "I let it happen, Dad." He said he had told himself for years he was keeping the peace, that if he did not take a side, nothing would blow up. And he said, but not taking a side meant you were standing there by yourself every time, and I knew it. And I said, Nathan, somewhere after you turned 25, I confused helping you with protecting you, and you cannot do both. Helping somebody makes them stronger. Protecting somebody keeps them exactly where they are. I kept holding your hand for a good 15 years after you needed it, and the result is that you were 38 years old before you found out what a house cost. Sophie came up 3 weeks later. She drove up on a Saturday by herself, thinner in the face, all the armor off her voice, and she handed me a wrapped box. The photographs, every single one. She had had 2 of them reframed because the glass had cracked in storage, and she had paid for the reframing herself, and she did not mention it. She stood on my porch and told me why. She said her father had never owned a house, 13 rentals, 6 school districts. And then she said, and then I was 25 years old, and we had a house, and it was not mine. The paper had your name. The walls had your wife's pictures. The neighbors called it your house. And I was down the hall. She said, I told myself I was just updating a room. And then her voice broke. She said, I was trying to make it mine. And the only way I could think of to do that was to take you out of it one thing at a time. And you were the easiest one to take because you never said anything about it. I stood on my own porch and I did not say what I wanted to say for about 10 seconds because I understood her. I understood her completely and instantly in a way I had not been able to for 4 years. Sophie was 30 years old and she had never in her life had a home of her own, and she got one with an asterisk written all over it. And she spent 4 years trying to erase that asterisk. And I was the asterisk. And she said, I thought because you never said anything, it did not cost you anything. That is the sentence right there. That is the whole thing. I said I had forgiven her before she got out of the car, because forgiveness is the easy half. Trust is the part that takes years. 2 years on now. They bought a small house last spring in a quiet neighborhood outside Burlington. And they did it entirely themselves. Nathan stayed on the weekend shifts at the lumber yard for 19 months straight, and the down payment came out of an account with only their 2 names on it. They asked me to come down and help them plant a maple tree in the front yard. Not to pay for it, to be in the dirt with them. And I knelt down in that soil with my son on one side of me and his wife on the other, and I thought about Grace's envelope, Sunday dinners are back. Martin is quieter than he used to be, and I have started asking him about the towns he lived in as a young man, and it turns out there are some real stories buried in that man that nobody had ever asked him for. So here is what this whole thing taught me, and it is not the lesson everybody thinks. Everybody wants the lesson to be set your boundaries, fine, true. The real one is this: the money was never what they took from me. I paid 179 mortgage payments, and I never once flinched. What ended it was a plastic tub in a hall closet. People will tell you that a family fight is about money because money is the thing you can put a number to. It almost never is. It is about who gets to be visible in a room. And the mechanism is not taking, it is removal. And removal is silent. Nobody announces a removal. Your chair just ends up in the corner. Your name turns into somebody's dad. Your workshop turns into an opportunity. You will notice it if somebody takes something from you. You will almost never notice somebody removing you because there is no moment. There is just a Tuesday when the mantle looks different and you cannot say exactly why. Grace used to tell me a house is not the roof you can see, it is the beams underneath that nobody looks at. She was talking about marriage. She was talking about our boy. She was talking about me. And it took me until I was 68 years old, sitting on a porch swing in a town Grace had never seen, to hear what she had actually been saying to me for 37 years. The beams are what hold a house up, and if nobody ever looks at them, one day they will assume the roof is holding itself. So here is the one thing I would ask you to actually do this week. If you are quietly carrying a cost for somebody in your life, a payment, a bill, a thing that comes out of your account every month, and nobody has ever mentioned, say the number out loud one time, not in a fight, not to collect on it. Pick a calm evening and say, I want you to know this is what this costs me, and I am glad to do it, and I am not asking for anything back. Because a cost nobody has ever said out loud cannot be appreciated. It cannot even be resented. It can only be assumed. And once it is assumed for long enough, it disappears. And then you disappear right along with it. The young family who bought the house sent me a card at Christmas. Inside was a photograph. She had taken a picture of the bookshelves with the stockings hanging from them. There is a small piece of tiger maple on the third shelf from the bottom, on the left side, about the size of a playing card. They do not know it is there. That is all right. It is holding just the same. If this story stayed with you tonight, if it reminded you of someone you love or someone who has loved you quietly for years without ever asking for anything back, share it with them before you go to bed. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this. Leave a comment and tell me which moment in this story hit you the hardest, because I read every single one. And sometimes the people who need these words the most find them through you. Take care of the beams in your own house, the ones nobody sees, because those are the ones holding the whole thing up.